Welcome, everybody, to yet another Authors at Google event. We're very fortunate today to have Dr. Louann Brizendine. She received her undergraduate degree in neurobiology from UC Berkeley, attended the Yale Law School of Medicine, and completed a residency in psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Dr. Brizendine is on the faculty of the UCSF Medical School and the Langley Porter Psychiatric Institute. In 1994, she founded the UCSF Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic and continues to serve as the director. So Dr. Brizendine is here today to talk about her book, The Female Brain, and you can ask her about her next book, which is The Male Brain. So please welcome Dr. Brizendine.
Thanks very much, Anne. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to come and get the chance to speak to you all, especially as this is the only gig I took for the entire last 10 months because I have a 90-day deadline that's coming up for The Male Brain. It's cooking. It's in my computer, so it's fun to switch and get to write The Male Brain after having written The Female Brain. So thank you all for having me, and thanks, Anne, for being so persistent and setting this all up. I really appreciate it. And anyway, I thought what I would do is just tell you a little how I got involved in writing a book, since I am a professor at UCSF. And my students are all about 27 years old to 32-year-old, both medical students and residents doing their third and fourth year of residency. And I've been running a clinic that I founded in 1994 called the Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic that has to do with the hormonal effects on the female brain at all stages of a woman's life, and also, of course, in development. And I got interested in that in my undergraduate days, actually at UC Berkeley, where I was the first graduating class in a new, at that time, major called neurobiology. And they didn't have an undergraduate degree until my class graduated in that. And much of that was with my professors in developmental neuroendocrinology. So how the brain develops under the influence of hormones was one of my very first interests after I entered actually in architecture school, and I was going to be an architect for my first couple of years at Berkeley, and then decided that drafting, that was the years before AutoCAD. I know there are very few people in this room that remember the days before AutoCAD, but there was a time before AutoCAD. You had to hand draft everything with ink drawings, and you're up until 2 and 3 in the morning every night in your drafting table. So I decided somehow that wasn't going to be my cup of tea, and I transferred into neuroscience and really enjoyed the aspects of the behavioral influences of hormones. And of course, in those days, some of the leaders in the field that were my professors were like Frank Beach, who is probably known as the father or now grandfather of hormones and sexual function. So he was the leader in looking at hormonal effects on driving the brain to have a proclivity or an interest in various aspects of mating behavior. So this was way back before many of your time in the 1970s. And what else was going on, of course, at UC Berkeley at that time was a very robust feminist movement, of which I was a part of at that time. And actually, my first work-study job was in archiving the Women's Her Story Library, which is now housed in the Bancroft Library, but in those days it was in the basement of the Woman's House, who was a professor, and I was filing by hand all of the papers that she had for the Women's Her Story Library. But the two of those things, understanding the hormonal effects on brain and behavior, and then being a very big part of the feminist movement was part of my life then, and the aspect of the unisex brain, because at 19 or 20 years old, in that era was an era when it was during the Equal Pay for Equal Rights movement, because the ERA, everyone was trying to get that passed. Of course, you know that failed, and it's still, I guess women in this country still make, what, is it 70, yeah, is it about 76 cents on the dollar to the male? Anyway, it's still not equal, so we haven't come that far in that aspect of equality. But if you said that anything was different, between either sexes or races, or that anything was different, it meant that you couldn't then say, I deserve equal pay for equal work. So it was an important time politically to say that there is a unisex everything. And of course, I think that influenced my career a lot, because by damn, I wasn't going to let anybody tell me what I could and couldn't do based on the fact that I was female, and I was going to do what I wanted to do in my career. And you know, I didn't have very much discrimination in my life as a female at the different levels. At the time, I was right behind the first wave of, I was at Yale, there were 37 or 8% of my medical school class at Yale were females. At the same time at UCSF, it was 50%. So it already hit that, what I call critical mass level, most places. So I didn't really experience very much discrimination ever in my career. So I didn't sort of understand that level of things. But then the big change in my personal life that happened is when I got pregnant with my son. And of course, I was going to raise I was going to give my son gender-neutral toys. I was going to raise him in all the ways that you're somebody there, you're smiling. I can see Peter back there smiling too. I was going to give my kid, you know, whatever. He could have trucks and dolls or whatever. So I still remember giving him, you know, the doll in the backs for Christmas at whatever age he was, 3.5, and he seizes it and immediately uses one of the legs as a spear to fight off the whatever imaginary enemy. You know, he was being the hero fighting off whatever, you know, his team against their team, you know. And you can imagine what he does these days as an 18-year-old. He's like a really serious gamer. That's all he does is game. You know, he has his 2-terabyte computer in his room, and he never sees the light of day. We live in Sausalito. You know, his skin is like, you know, he looks like a white rat. And, you know, his hair, he never comes out of the room. I never see him before. Only if I'm up until midnight has he even gotten out of bed getting ready to game. You know, he's one of those. So let's hope he makes a living someday. Be that as it may, the issue then for me was, okay, holy Toledo, if this, you know, so it came really home to roost in a way that was very palpable. And I, of course, I knew about the hormonal effects in the development of the brain. And so going back to how I got started writing this book, The Female Brain, and of course, you know, I think we all know in this room, just looking at the people to the left and the right of you and behind you, I mean, each of us may come from either a different racial group, a different gender, whatever it is, but we are our own very individual mix of whatever. So when you write a book and you try to write what the average of anything is and talk about the sex differences and talk about how things evolve, what you have to also remember is, if you think of a bell-shaped curve, 2 of them, with a flagpole up the middle, right? That's the mean. And one of the curves is the male and one is the female. They overlap in all kinds of cognitive areas, in all kinds of areas. Actually, the overlap is pretty large. It's in the 80 to 90% range a lot. But if you put those flagpoles up and you measure the distance between those for the genders, that's always in any research study called the gender difference. So anytime you talk about the average, but if you look down at the bottom of those bell-shaped curves, they're snuggled up and overlap to each other by a big percent. In some areas 10, some areas 20, 30% overlap. So some typical female behaviors, you may find males in that category and vice versa. So I want to say that up front, and I know, having been a tomboy myself a lot, I mean, I like to play with lizards and catch lizards and snakes, and I used to have dolls, but they were only useful in kind of making outfits for them. That was all of us. And I like to play with the boys in the backyard better than, you know, I just did stuff that was not, you know, was not totally what they called female gender typical as a tomboy. But so, and I kind of went my own path in life. So I think we have to honor the very individual people and differences we are. So, but when you write a book, you try to write about what all the research studies are showing about the differences. And I guess what came home to me deeply is the issue that there's no unisex brain in terms of the development, because by 8 weeks of fetal life, and I know Julie's over here over here and just announcing her pregnancy. I know today you're out, right? You're out with your friend. Okay, she's out with her pregnancy anyway, and she doesn't know what sex the baby is. But actually, by 8 weeks of fetal life, the tiny testicles in the male fetus are pumping out huge amounts of testosterone up to the adult male level, and it is marinating the entire body, but also marinating the brain. And up until that point, the male brain has been what's called, the default pattern is the female brain. The female body is the default pattern. If you do not have the tiny testicles that make testosterone, that body and brain will develop into the female pattern. So the default is female in nature, in biology. And those tiny testicles pumping out all the huge testosterone change some of the brain circuits into what we call the male typical brain circuits. By the time we're all born, we either have female or male brain circuits. Of course, there's a lot of individual variation. And then there's a time after birth, starting at 1 month old, that biologists call infantile puberty. Because as soon as you're taken off the hormone and blood supply of your mother and the umbilical cord is cut, all of the hormones that were coming from the placenta and the mother are taken away abruptly. And within a month, the baby has to be making a lot of their own hormones. And if it's female, she starts making huge amounts of estrogen up to the female adult levels. And if it's a male, starts making hormones from the testicles up to the male level for about the first 9 to 12 months of age in the baby boy, and up to actually almost 24 months in the baby girls. And it's a time of life for humans. It's very hard to study because that age kid is very, very hard to study. So we know about this. We don't know what it's doing to the brain. We don't necessarily know what it's doing to the body. But all the biologists believe that it has something to do with kind of getting all of your sex cells, either your sperm or your oocytes in your ovaries, kind of pushed up and ready, and the brain ready for what you're going to need to be a sexually active and reproduce yourself at some point. Then, in humans, though, we go through something called the juvenile pause. From about age 2 years old to 9 years old in girls, and maybe 10 years old in boys, when it's a quiescent period, when everything is very, very quiet with the gonads, until something happens. It's a cute, the scientists have a protein that's called the KISS protein, K-I-S-S. So it's actually got a funny, cute little name for all kinds of historical reasons. The KISS proteins just all of a sudden turn on and start to activate the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the testicles or the ovaries. And they start pumping out the hormones that will then change the body into the adult male. So all of the sexual hair, the penis starts to grow and thicken, the breast buds come in the girls, and then the teen girl brain or the teen boy brain gets turned on. Now, in girls, 2 years before their first period is the time that their body and brain are having all these hormone surges in their brain and body. So actually, by the time a girl starts her period, her brain has already been in puberty, often for about 18 months or so. You know, you guys see all these tween girls that are crazy about the Jonas Brothers. Have you guys seen them? They're like in tears. I know that Rolling Stone called me. I did an interview with them last week that came out this week in Rolling Stone, so it was very funny because they're going like, Dr. Brizendine, why are these teen girls? They're crying. They're sitting on they're actually almost having seizures. They're, you know, what's going on there? And I guess you guys had them here recently, and the mothers were like lined up for, I guess Ann said, for miles with their girls in the van. So tween girls get a period of becoming, very interested in the sexual. I mean, we think it's the media, we think it's that causes this, but actually the sexual interest in the teen girl and tween girl brain starts to be awakened at that stage that's between 10, 11, 12. And it happens in all cultures in the world. The cultures where they stretch their ears long, or the necks, or the scarification marks on the face. There are girls who can't wait to get to do that in those cultures because it's what's considered sexually attractive to the male, that means that they are sexually interested and they are ready to go into womanhood. And it's not anything that anyone tells them they should do or ought to do, they can't wait to do it. Just like girls in our culture can't wait to wear whatever the sexy outfits are, which are, it's sort of silly to see these 8 and 9-year-old girls, right, going to the Stanford shopping mall and buying all this. They have this, lust for that. That is the turning on of the sexual interest circuits in the female brain, is to bring the male attention. And it's, every person has a little bit of a different tweak on that, but I think it's something in our culture that then the commercialization, the media plays on that, so that it goes down into directions that lots of us would not like to see our kids go down, and we don't necessarily want to see, that's not necessarily the best use of female brain power or any brain power. Then the boys, of course, lag behind. When I talk to teen boys in high schools, when I talk to them about some of the differences in the onset of puberty, I ask the boys, how do they know puberty's coming for boys, or what is it? Boys will say the deep voice, or the mustache, or whatever. So actually, biologists measure it by the first wet dream, which is usually at about 13.5 years old. And of course, boys don't talk about that much, and all the boys are going like, "Oh God, she knows," Anyway, so and they're kind of looking around the room. So we figured if we're going to talk about girls' periods, we can talk about the guys' wet dreams. So so that basically means that part of the body, the testicles are actually gearing up and getting ready for procreation. So if you look at the sex differences in brain, that both, by the way, hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and the Y chromosome, or the double X. Females have 2 X's, males have an X and a Y. The Y is actually a fairly tiny amount of genes on the Y chromosome. It's smallish. So we females actually have about 931 more genes in our body than you guys have. So you can either say you are more efficient, or and the X chromosomes do. Much of the X chromosome, and all of you guys have 1 X chromosome. X chromosome genes are very highly engaged in developing brain circuits, by the way. There's a lot of CNS circuitry that's caused by genes on the X chromosome. So females and males have some different hormones and some different genes, some different brain circuitry, and the evolutionary biologists believe that the reason that for hundreds of thousands of years we are slightly different in our ability that are well known for females to pick up emotional nuance in faces, emotional nuance in some body nonverbal behaviors, has to do with keeping helpless infants and nonverbal infants alive for the first 2 years of life. That has been something that's been highly selected for many, many generations for the survival of our species. And things that may be more prevalent in males had to do more with the survival of in their ability to go out and father children. So that the types of things that you may find in cognitive or behavioral aspects of male and female brains really go back to that basic principle. And that's not everything, obviously, within our brains. That's the pieces of things that often cause misunderstandings, shall we say, in relationships. I think this is the first time in history that, first of all, it's a whole generation of women, 2 generations of women who have had complete control over their fertility, about how many children to have or not to have 0, to have 1, to have 2. And that certainly makes a big difference in options. Couples are often, in terms of the financial power relationship in couples, is often more equivalent. So that all of a sudden, we have all of this circuitry that's geared up for what our reproductive behaviors are. And the mommy brain circuits get very much influenced by the hormones of pregnancy. And by the time the baby is born, there's a lot of on autopilot that the female body and brain have to be on autopilot to keep that helpless infant alive. And any of you that have had babies or in this room, you know what they're like. They're a little blob, and they cry a lot. And basically, you have to be totally in love with them to put up with it. It's but it's very, very biologically and hormonally hardwired in the female brain to do that. Interestingly enough, guys, having just done all the research for the daddy brain, the female starts to give off pheromones from her sweat glands that you don't smell. A pheromone is a hormone that's in the air, but you don't really, quote unquote, smell it. It's not like BO or anything, but it's a pheromone that the female body starts to put off that actually then increases the hormone prolactin in the male brain, the daddy brain, and to slightly decrease his testosterone level. So by the time the baby is born, actually the daddy brain has been even primed for a lot of things hormonally that we just never knew before. So you guys actually have action there and hormones in your brain too as you're becoming fathers, which makes sense that evolutionarily that would have been something important to have fathers be very aggressively protective of the mother and the baby after birth, because that very, very delicate, immature stage that humans are born. So there's all kinds of match, and of course, not very many people have bothered to study dads or hormones and circuitry in fathers that have to do with infant care up until this point. This was basically very, very young and early field that's very, very few studies up until the last couple of years. So that's a brand new field, is the daddy brain, or the paternal behavior in the human. And of course, there's lots of hormones in rodents that are studied that are called the monogamy genes and the monogamy hormones that have been looked at in a little creature called the prairie vole, where some voles are very monogamous. The prairie vole, the male and female, the male is highly monogamous, bonds for life with that one female. But in his cousin, the montane vole, he's very promiscuous. It's like a hit and run deal. I mean, it's many, you know, he's here today, gone within 20 seconds, that kind of guy. But they are genetically otherwise almost completely related except for a couple of genes. So it's very interesting that in that species, and there's some, they look at that actually, chimpanzees are very promiscuous, and bonobos are very promiscuous. So there's all kinds of like mating differences that have developed in lots of mammals. There's only 5% of mammals, by the way, are paternal. And humans, of course, are one. Some of these little voles that are they look like little furry rats. And some mice have very, very aggressive, protective paternal roles. So there's a lot of what hormones and circuitry in our brain has to do with is survival of the species and about relationships. So there we are. I mean, the fact that a woman can remember an emotional fight or some kind of fight 10 years later, that the guy looks at her and says, oh, yeah, but he looks at her face and he knows he better remember. But the emotional memory of interactions, relationship interactions, have a long life in females, and it's been well known for a long time that female memory for emotional events seems to be filed in our brain much more clearly for a longer time. So there's some interesting differences. You may have, anybody heard of the spatial rotation difference in male and female brains? Anybody ever hear of that? Now, there's a lot of females who can do it a lot better than males too, obviously. But on average, they've brain scanned men and women while they're laying in a brain scanner doing what's called mental rotation of, you know that IQ test where they have the blocks and they say, okay, look at this one, choose the one below, which one of the four below looks like that one, and you have to twist it around in your mind. Any of you guys remember that one? Okay, and guys on average can typically do it faster. Not necessarily better or different answers. It's one of those things that has a difference. When they talk about the statistical difference in the average height between a male and female, the average male is taller than the average female, although there are lots of females who are taller than the males. But in this particular cognitive task, males' difference from females is about the same as the difference in height. So it's considered one of the things that is fairly different. If you brain scan the areas where the female or male brain are solving it, the back of the brain is that visual cortex. So first, there's a light up on the brain scan of the back, visual, in both the male and female. Then there's an area right up here in the frontal parietal strip right here, where you're visualizing structure and things changing. And then the males go straight to the frontal cortex and they give the answer. The females, however, after they come up here, they go down to a little area here, sort of in the temporal gyrus, and then go to the front and get the answer. So what's interesting about that to me is, and they get the same answer. It takes them a little bit longer. So when you're doing timed tests, that's why it turns out to be different. When you're doing timed tests on that specific one tiny little area, and there's a lot of argument about what this means anyway to anything functional, probably nothing, but it's just something that neurocognitive psychologists have done for a long time. That type of thing about how we all, and probably unique individual difference of how we all use our brains through different circuitry to come up with answers is and people who are very, very creative probably use a whole different circuitry. Be that as it may, that's the kind of thing, is like going down different paths in the brain to come up with the answer. And that one test shows some gender differences. So that's about the only thing. The average IQ between males and females is the same. There's a lot of people that go through all kinds of things about the verbal aspects of females that are able to come up with answers much more quickly in the verbal arena, which has been known for a long time as well. Females tend to use both of their hemispheres in their brain a lot more for all tasks. Males tend to often use one side of their brain exclusively to drill down on some kind of an answer. So I think that what we do know is that in our world now, it takes all kinds of brains to come up with incredible answers, and that's why I think that having female, I mean, you guys are kind of like the rainbow of the future in this room right now. I mean, it takes all kinds of brains to come up with all kinds of important answers. So this issue of the male and female brain being somewhat different is very, very interesting. I think it has a lot to do sometimes with things that play out in our relationship world. And in our world, once you start having babies, that period of a woman's life, when she has one or two children, that kind of piece. I remember that my boyfriend and I in medical school, we both decided we were going to be like, everything was going to be even Steven. We were going to be tag team parenting. We were going to each have part-time jobs, 20-hour jobs when we had kids, and we were going to do everything 50-50, right? The part that you don't take into account in the equation is that infant is going to prefer the adult with the breasts. So we left out a major part of the equation. And that's when you're breastfeeding, I mean, you're also tied every 2 hours to the baby, and there's a whole, you just don't think that through when you're only whatever age we were at that time. So that piece of things, and that, obviously there's incredible sharing of tasks and sharing of all kinds of things that couples do now that are wonderful. And I think that Google is also one of the places that's making that possible for parents to be able to, what I call, toggle between work and home, and being able to have all kinds of new types of jobs where you can actually be around your kids more and multitasking all of the time because of the new world that you guys are all involved in. And building for the future for couples and families to have a whole new experience in the world. So I would love to take some questions from you all that I hope you have, and I know that Peter back there has a couple of teen girls in your household too, and maybe you would be able to tell us what it's like having teen girls in the household too, with the teen girl brain. Has that been a surprise to you, Peter? As individuals, yes.
I remember the story from George Miller, that's number 7, where he'd been doing this psychology stuff, and then he said he had never been that interested in child development, and then he had his first kid, and he said, wow, this is amazing. I have these ideas in child development, and they're all confirmed, and people don't know this. I'm going to have to write a book. So just like you, he started writing a book. And while he was writing it, he had his second kid and then threw the book away. So I've certainly noticed that in mine. And I think in this nature versus nurture debate, people come down on both sides until they have more than one kid. And then they all pretty much recognize that they're their own people and we don't have much to do with it.
The nature piece of that, because I like to say that the nature-nurture debate is dead. You're agreeing
it
with
seems that way.
Yeah, so that's...
But actually, while I got the microphone, I have another question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So you mentioned that IQ seems to be not a gender difference, but there's been a bunch of studies, one just a week or two ago, that says the variance is higher for males. And that seems to be true for lots of factors across lots of mammals where, the females are going to be sexually productive no matter what, but males need to compete more, and so they tend to be higher variance. And can you talk about that?
That's very interesting. So a lot of what we see in gender differences, one of the things, if you just always, whenever you see one of these studies or one of the media, they come out every couple of weeks, oh, scientists showed this, and oh, the thing that you just remember, the one key piece is that if there is a difference in something like this, it must have had some kind of a reproductive advantage for the male or for the female. And since males, there's the area that testosterone increases in the male fetus is called an area. It's an area in the hypothalamus called the area for sexual pursuit. That's actually a technical name, the area for sexual pursuit. And I think that sort of says it all. And it grows to 2.0 to 2.5 times larger in the male brain than the female. Actually, that's in humans. In rats, it's 6.0 to 7.0 times larger in the male rat than the female rat. So you guys are relatively small in that regard, Be that as it may. What's important about what you said, Peter, I'm coming back to your comments, my long securities, my circuits have many little tributaries here, is that if there's something that's going to be a large splay between clustering, let's say, of activities or abilities in different areas that have some kind of large sex difference, or like you're saying, there's men that cluster in the very, very high IQ and some in the very, very low, and so the distribution is not, to say the average IQ is the same in males and females is one thing, but if you look at how many males are in the lowest 10% and how many males are in the highest 10%, they are skewed. There's more males in the lowest 10% and there's more males in the highest 10% in terms of lots of testing. Those things, what's that? Yeah, that's right, the percentage, so it's impossible, but there's the issue of finding about, all of these things seem to have to do with different ways that males have competed. They even think that human language may have developed as a way that men could woo females. That there's a whole theory about why language even developed in the human, and it had to do with those men who could speak or could utter words or were kind of showing off to females, and that the females would select them over some guy who couldn't talk. Yeah. So there's a whole neurolinguistic developmental theory about that. But that's, Peter, I think it's what you're alluding to, is that this issue of, is it going to give males a competitive edge in the dating and mating game? And if it did, and it was robust and it lasted for many generations, people ask me, well, Dr. Brizendine, now that everything's changed with women in the last couple of last 50 years, don't you think there's going to be, all the genes are going to be changing or this? Well, change in genes takes a lot longer than like 50 years. So maybe 50 generations from now, we'll know some of how that's been tweaked by our current social structure changes. But Peter, you're right about that. If it's giving the males a selective advantage in mating behavior, and that females will choose them, females will choose, like females do choose males. There's many studies that human females choose males who are, who actually, if they want to mate with them for a long time and have them be the father of their children, the actual facial structure of a male that's highly masculine is not who they will choose. They'll choose the highly masculine facial structure to have a brief relationship with, but they'll choose the male with a slightly softer look and less like masculine look to his face for the long-term mating game. So, go figure. So female choice comes into this. Yes.
On the difference in IQ variance point, the explanation I usually hear is that among men, the competition is fiercer because they have the potential of having a larger number of offspring, but are also more likely to have none because they get killed. Therefore, there's more upside potential to basically taking like a riskier gamble with their IQ.
Yeah, yes, and of course, one of the ways that human societies have weeded out their young male population is by sending them to war and getting the young male population killed.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on you hear people talk about the relationship between like sending young men off to war and also like polygamy.
Polygamy and sending
Right.
them off to war. Is there a relationship
Well,
between those? Okay.
Right. Well, the idea is that for every man that has 2 wives, there's another one that will have 0, and you have to do something with them.
You have
so
to.
I was wondering if you'd heard of that.
You
And if so, if you had any
had to
thoughts
spread
on
the
it.
goods around a little, right? Okay. You got to make all of the women happy, right? And all the men. How do you match up the numbers when you're killing off a huge piece of your young male population by sending them to wars? I mean, if you look at what happened in Great Britain, for example, in World War I and II, I mean, huge amounts of young men were killed off, and so the spinster librarian female or the spinster teacher was much more common in certain generations. So there were not enough men. There were not enough men to go around. Definitely true. So how that works out, but so the issue of human males and monogamy versus polygamy, because there are which is an interesting question and an interesting issue because of course males can basically you guys have a 3-minute investment in producing the next generation. If I mean at its low end, let's say, right? And, well, we females, well, the average time to male ejaculation is 3.5 minutes, ladies. So I know that we need 13 to 18 minutes, but that's a whole other area of my clinic that I deal with. So I'll answer questions on that too. But the issue of kind of how the 9-month pregnancy and then raising a helpless infant to the age of 4 years old, which is when the child is able to potentially survive on its own, is another level of investment of males being able to be polygamous more easily than females. So, but actually, the dirty little secret, by the way, of geneticists in human genetic studies on lots of diseases and things is that they will run the genes of the family. And there's the couple in front of them and the father's saying, they're both thinking they're the biological parent. He's chuckling away. So 6 to 10, the low number is 6%, the high number is 10%. 6 to 10% of those fathers who believe they are the father of that child are not. And this is so you never can reveal that information. That's an ethical violation. So but anyway, so the issue of, but females are also not always monogamous as we kind of think in a stereotypical way. So there's lots of blending of but males, you're right, can be more, and to have lots of your male population killed off in wars, and that has been something for many in different pockets of populations over time. When you actually do a lot of historical research and people are looking at the historical record, males have had to have more wives and be father in communities where there are almost no young males. That's true. So, yes, here in the front.
I know there's lots of stereotypes about how to communicate with males and females, and I don't know if any of those have been dismissed in your studies, but maybe if you could tell us the top 3 to 5 tips or tricks to communicate with the female and communicate with the male, like as far as speaking louder, softer, emotional, or, just little variances like that.
So did y'all hear that about the tips for the male-female communication, which is always the kind of funny, cute stuff, and there's lots of kind of ways and thinking, the truth, any individual, because there's so much individual variation. So you got to know that person a little bit to be able to match it up. But I'll give you an example in my own household, because one of the things that females complain most about in my clinic is that guys just don't listen, right? They just don't listen, whatever. Or the issue is also that they won't listen to how I feel about something. So for example, in my household, my husband is a neuroscientist, and he's a very, very linear guy, and he's kind of a geek. I mean, he's a self-proclaimed geek and proud of it, He's a scientist. And so I'll come home from the office, from the clinic someday, and such happened, and I just want to tell him about it, and I just want to whatever. But he needs to solve the problem immediately for me. I'll say, well, honey, you know what you should do? Or you know who you should talk to, or it's like it's such, it's not even 3.5 minutes. I mean, it's like, so, and we joke because he now has a yellow sticky on his computer. He's often on his computer that says he's supposed to turn to me and say one sentence before he launches into his treatment plan, he's supposed to say, honey, I know how you feel. And I can tell you that a few weeks ago, we were already in bed at night, and there was something really going on, and I had talked to him about it, and he had said, I looked at him, he said, I know I'm supposed to say, honey, I know how you feel, but what good's that really going to do anyway? So, because in his mind, it doesn't do, quote, any good. In my mind, what it does for me is I'm getting feedback from somebody that they understand what the problem is in terms of my feeling tone about the issue, not necessarily the specifics. I just want to talk out loud and have someone feed back to me a piece of that. So I think that little funny tricks, and usually at our household, it's become a joke, you know. But there are ways, and I think that it's how he wants to be helpful to me. He can't stand to see me upset, you know, and he wants to fix it for me because he loves me. You know, I know that it all comes from a good place and good intention, but I would just like him to, and his brain does not want to actually feel how I feel. His brain does not like to feel how I feel. You know, you're shaking your head, right? You know that. So I guess that it's also that communication between couples and kind of how you can, so I give you that for the home front. You're talking about more in the workplace and how you can sort of do something in the work, you'll take the workplace, you'll take the home place too, the workplace. I mean, I think that the issue of getting to a problem-solving, logical, I have an 18, almost 19-year-old son, and he'll say, Mom, when I get a girlfriend, he says, I'm not sure I could ever have one, but I want one that's really logical, because I can't take, he wants someone who's really logical, because he's had his mother, what can I say? But the really logical. So I think that there are a lot of men who appreciate and like getting the problem solved without a lot of diversions down tributaries, and like to be efficient moving. And so if you know that about the guy, and if the guys know that sometimes females in their thought process, you know that thing, they may have another part of their brain circuit that they need to go into that's actually going to allow them to be their best self, be their best brain, or come up with their most creative solution. Did any of you hear the news last week about that neuroscientists have now found the place in the brain for what's called intuition? Did any of you read about that last week? So it's really cool that they've actually found the spot in the brain, in the right hemisphere, right in the superior temporal gyrus, kind of right in here. If you put your finger into your brain about this far, right above your ear, you'd go right to that place on the right side. But it's that place in your mind. You know how you might have been working on a problem or whatever it is, and then sometime you might be out taking a hike someplace, or be out doing something else, or you're taking a shower, and all of a sudden, it's like, you just literally draw your breath in, and it's there. It's all of a sudden you got it. And you weren't even really thinking about it. That kind of putting your brain into neutral and not looking at the problem so intensely goes into the right brain and allows you in that particular place to kind of all of a sudden get the solution. Now, how you get to that place, how we all get to the place to allow ourselves to be the most creative, and how you work within your teams here, because I know you have a wonderful team structure where you try to really make things happen that way, is with a lot of variety of activities. For working with males and females in group, having a lot of variety of types of activities helps everybody be their best self. And I think men more typically use that left side of their brain. They feel that there's some purity in getting that logical piece down and getting to the answer quickly and not messing around a lot. So if you can know a little bit about how other people think, I think the first principle of, all of us are very different, but if you can at least think about the male and female, how they are slightly different, then that even opens your mind to thinking about how other ones of your teammates, be they male or female, are thinking about problems. I think that's one way scientists have actually used the gender differences to be a hook into research protocols to look at, okay, if we can see this difference first, then that may lead us to other very interesting differences about how to look at problems. So thanks for that question. I know that wasn't sort of as tippy as like the magazines that often interview me. They want to like, okay, I want my stick, but that's the yellow sticky. So honor the guy's desire to get to it quickly, and then encourage him to honor your need to maybe explore in other circuitries a little bit, just honoring the difference. I saw another question back here. Yes.
Okay, I wanted to know if in your research, your sample population, did it account for cultural diversity for the female brain? Is there culturally competent research?
So, you know, one of the problems in all research is that the cultural twist on gender is very interesting. I mean, I know even when I went to Spain and did the book went on the bestseller list in Spain, so they actually asked me to come over. So I did a whole lot of things in the whole Latino world, and all the women also wanted to know what about this machismo thing in guys, and how the cultural and relationship world works out in how men in that culture think they ought to be in order to be a real man. I mean, we have a little bit of that in our culture. But if you don't take that into account in your research protocols, I'm just using that as one cultural example, then you miss some of the richness of the interaction. So the cultural pieces of this do really matter. And to get to the bottom line, culturally competent research studies almost are non-existent at this point. So that's a really great question. Thank you for that. Yes.
So what about the people, like the men who feel like they're living in a female body, or how does that happen?
So remember how I said the tiny testicles in the male fetus at 8 weeks start pumping out all of that testosterone, and then it marinates the body, which basically changes the gonads from being uterus and ovary into being penis and testicle, and the brain changes to the male brain circuits, the female. There's some receptors that are abnormal in certain genetic diseases where the receptors for testosterone are abnormal and don't respond to the testosterone, even though it's a genetic male, so it would be an XY baby, but none of his tissues can respond to testosterone. And so that baby will come out with female genitals, a female brain, but be infertile because they are an XY. So they won't develop into really totally normal ovaries and genitalia. So their brain, indeed, would be a female brain in a female body, but there's some that are what are called partial genetic mutations, where there's enough testosterone where the male genitals will develop, but the brain will stay more in the feminine direction. So that could be a male body with a female brain. So there are all kinds of different genetic abnormalities that can cause that. And that lots of times those are the people who do go for sex change operations at some point in their life. There's a clinic in Denmark who's been doing that for about 35 years, and they're probably the best in the world at doing the research in this area. And so those people would like to transition to live in the body that matches their brain. So that's one of the reasons why. Yes, in the red.
I read The Female Brain about 1.5 years ago and gave it to a lot of women friends and to my mother.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, I loved it. So interesting. And I told them all not to show any men the book.
Well, actually, there's one page in the book for men. Page 39. Page 39 is the book, the page for the men. That's page 39. So they can have that one page.
One of the reasons for that was because the way you describe what women go through and you give some clinical examples that are very extreme is a little alarming. There's so much variability in emotion and almost in personality, to the point that, why would you ever hook up with this woman? She's crazy. You know, it just seems, portrayed.
Well, some of the guys in this room would probably ask themselves that same question. I don't know.
So I'm wondering, with your new book coming out, if there's as much kind of extreme hormonal shifting throughout a man's life, and, you know,
well, interestingly enough, to answer your question, so one of the things hormones do, and the thing that hormones are supposed to do for behavior is they're supposed to give you the proclivity to push your behavior a little bit in that direction. So let's say your own character or personality style is a certain way. Hormones might push you 20% this way or that way. You know, so it's not like a whole personality. So the menstrual cycle, as you know, has that first 2 weeks right before ovulation has huge amounts of estrogen. And at the peak of that, females are their horniest, they're most sassy, they're actually the most verbal. I tell my graduate student females to plan their oral exams on day 10 of their menstrual cycle because they're also the most verbal. And then towards the end of the cycle, that week before the period starts, there's the progesterone actually is natural Valium in the brain. Females don't feel, they feel like, lots of times they'll feel a little more mellow, a little more laid back. They don't feel quite as, they're usually energetic. I mean, there's about a 20% shift that some women can actually feel a lot. Then some women's personalities can be pushed based on what other genes they have going on in their circuits. People who may have bipolar illness or have different types of mood or anxiety disorders, that week before the period, they can have massive shifts to what we call PMS, the really big-time PMS. About 80% of women can get that. We call it the crying over dog food commercials. In my clinic, that's what it's like. Because all women have had that feeling a couple of days before their periods start. Sometimes, well, just like something that doesn't hit you as being like just preciously tear-inducing, will hit you that way all of a sudden. You know, so that's a hormonal shift that causes a different mood state in your brain. It doesn't change your personality, but it pushes you into a behavior that wouldn't be ordinarily what you would be like on day 10 of your menstrual cycle. So females are really used to that, and males, once you've lived with females for a while, you get used to that too, and you know it's nothing you did that was bad or wrong. It's just what is. So I think to honor that piece of the diversity that the menstrual cycle gives the female brain in terms of behaviors, males between age of 9 and 15 have a 25-fold increase in testosterone. And in biology, a 25-fold increase is like enormous. So during those years, you guys, your brain is like, you know, shooting to the stars, on running on high test, you know, Maserati fuel, and the rest of you and your personality may not be quite ready for the fact that every woman's breast that walks by has a certain, you know, your eyes are like magnets, boom, you know. And my son, he says, yeah, Mom, he says, the girls, because we had some reason to discuss this, because it was Harvard Business Review, there's a Wall Street Journal called me and asked me about proper business attire for women after dinner business meetings or something like that. And so this issue of switching into these really sexy outfits when you've been working with a woman all day long in the office, and then you go to this cocktail party and, you know, she's like, you know, she could be a pole dancer or something, you know. But it was interesting because I had a discussion on the way to the hamburger joint with my son, which is the only way you can ever talk to teen boys about it. And I would say, what would guys your age say about this? You know, that's how I kind of put it. And then he'll say, well, Mom, guys my age would. And so then he can, it's not like me, Mom, but it's the guys my age. Yeah, right, my friend would say, whatever. But it's, so that issue of all of a sudden the testosterone hormone doesn't change his personality, but it's changing his proclivity to notice some female body part that was out there before, and all of a sudden now it's like the siren call, you know what I mean? So I think that just honoring this reality of how it pushes your proclivities in a direction or two is important. So that's the direction for it. And the girl in the second chapter in the Teen Girl Brain, I talk about a patient of mine who's not, her real name is not Shana, but I call her Shane in the book, that I worked with her for a lot of years. By the way, she's actually now in graduate school at MIT, so she's doing great. But you know, her teenage years were pretty rocky, as you could tell from the book. And I think that it's important to just kind of know what the diversity is, what the hormones can do to your behaviors, is then you can be in much more control of yourself and understand maybe the behavior of other people around you. So I hope that answered your question in a roundabout way. Yeah. I guess we have time for one more. We got a last burning question. Yes, okay, over here.
I'm loud,
so you know, I'll share mine with you.
Okay, thanks.
Girls share.
Right? So my question is also on hormones and the brain and how birth control might affect that, because I've read studies that women on birth control end up being attracted to people with similar chemistries to them, whereas they should be attracted to people with opposite chemistries. So I wonder how that all plays into things.
So guess what? I always thought it was amazing, this amazing question, because, you know, when the birth control pill came around in the 60s, remember, I mean, free love was the thing, right? I mean, we used to go around the Berkeley campus. There was the nude sunbathing deck in the women's gym and whatever. All the male professors in the economics department would come out on the 8th floor balcony and, like, you know. But anyway, it was free love. But the birth control pill was in, and it also meant that people wouldn't get pregnant, et cetera, et cetera. But what they didn't know is that actually it suppressed females' testosterone. It suppressed the menstrual cycle completely. And so the usual ebb and flow during the cycle of female interest in sex, which happens a lot right before ovulation, was flattened out. It's gone. So the birth control pill actually reduces female sex drive. Yes. It also reduces her, that little period right before she has ovulation is a period where they've done lots of studies that females prefer a certain type of a man with a very square jaw, very, very masculine look, maybe that short-term affair guy, whatever, at that time. So the birth control pill flattens out all of that. It just basically disconnects the pituitary to the ovary communication that goes on. It basically makes the brain think that it's slightly pregnant all the time. It just keeps everything quiet. There's no ovulation, so you don't get pregnant, but it also changes the brain function of that natural ebb and flow. Young women typically have enough testosterone, enough sex drive that that's not a problem for 90% of women. But I have I have a lot of women coming in my clinic that had that complaint. Since I went on the birth control pill, I lost my libido or whatever it is. But you're talking about also selection of a mate selection. Who I should be selecting, and I think that's always a big question. How do you select someone that's going to be a good partner through lots of transitions in your life with you? How do you select that person? I mean, the divorce rate in California has climbed to 50%. I mean, how do you make the right choice and not the wrong choice? I mean, a lot of us have made. I mean, I'm one that made some wrong choices along the way too. So it isn't so easy, and the hormonal issues, being on the birth control pill or not, probably don't make all that much of a difference. Your friends and your family should definitely be a filter, I would say, for you. And I didn't, of course, listen to my family, and I should have, but I didn't. So there's that teen time or that time in your life you don't want to listen to your family. But the issue of hormonal proclivities in females for choosing the square jaw, large browed, sort of big, masculine type of guy 2 or 3 days before your period, that gets blocked out by being on the birth control pill. So you might be able to choose a nicer guy. How about that? So thank you all so very much for being such a wonderful audience. And I know that you guys all work for Google, so if you go to the www.thefemalebrain.com, and any of you see anything there that you think is interesting or you'd like to, I'm donating proceeds from the book for a part of that website that I'm developing for teen girls to have a place to go and have an intelligent voice. And so I have a whole team of people, and we're going to do the beta launch of that part of it will be probably later this week. But just if you guys have any thoughts about that, we're always open for any new ideas. So that's what we're doing with the proceeds of the book. Since I already am a professor at UCSF, I figured I would use the proceeds from the book to do something good for teen girls. Actually, the girls want it to be called Teen Brain Power. So we're actually looking for a few teen boys. We found a few mothers here where the teen boys may do it. So if anybody has any teen boy who wants to participate, it'll be the Teen Brain Power website. So thank you all very much.